Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone formally now to this information session. And it's just so great to see so many people here. I mean, this is such a fabulous turnout, and it's very exciting to see this many people interested, as Susan said, in hosting a fellow and in this fellowship. So we're going to just start out by talking to you a little bit about, kind of a basic overview of the fellowship, so everyone has an understanding of, what it's about. And the fellowship basically funds for 2 years a fellow at a host organization working in, the area of tax public interest. So working with low income taxpayers in some way. And the fellowship, as Susan mentioned, basically we're looking for the fellow to be undertaking some, sort of a project in connection with the fellowship, plus also doing, the regular work that the organization does, oftentimes, though not always, work in an LITC, representing taxpayers directly, that kind of thing. And this fellowship, because we have more than one fellowship, this fellowship, the Christine Brunswick Fellowship, has been around for a while. It's like 15 years now, I guess. It's 2008 is when it started. And it was named a few years later after Christine Brunswick, who is a former executive director of the tax section, who was very, very focused on public interest work in her honor. And so this fellowship is focused on basically recent grads, people who are out just a few years, to help get them, get their feet wet in the world of public interest tax work, and hopefully give them an appetite to keep going and keep doing more public interest work in tax. And many of them do after the fellowship. And we choose 2 fellows typically every year for that 2-year cycle. So this year we'll be choosing the 2 fellows for the 2023 to 2025 cycle is what it would be. And there's been naturally a host of prior fellows. And since I've been talking a lot, Susan, do you want to talk a little bit maybe about some of the prior projects that fellows have done, places that they've worked, just give people a sense of?
Yeah, so there have been all kinds of organizations. There have been standalone nonprofit entities such as CTLP Community Tax Law Project. I see Nancy's on the call. She can discuss that a little bit. There have been legal aid organizations. In fact, there was a worker classification project that started at legal aid in Philadelphia. That person was then retained by that fellow was then brought on at Philadelphia Legal Assistance and has since moved on to head an academic LITC at Temple. So you can see there's a career path also for these fellows. There have been projects at some of the teaching institutions, and sometimes there was one, for instance, at University of Minnesota, where the fellow worked both at the academic LITC and with nonprofit organizations as well. So the sponsoring organization is really sort of any nonprofit. It doesn't need to be a funded LITC, but it needs to be involved in some tax work. What has been exciting for me to see is the number of fellows who have remained in public service, whether it's with the sponsoring entity and continuing the work that they've started as a fellow. Some have moved over to counsel's office, and I consider that public service as well. So it's been great to see that the spirit of the fellowship lives on.
Right. And I mean, as you can gather from what Susan is saying, a lot of this is kind of career development, that we're really interested in seeing the fellow be successful in their career and hopefully be focused on public interest, whether full-time or, as a part of what they do. And to help do that, I mean, the fellows, are also kind of folded into the tax section. So, we have 3 meetings a year, right? Going forward, the fall meeting, which actually is just coming up in a couple of weeks for those of you who might be interested and might want to register. It's in October. That one's virtual, basically from here on out. And so they get free registration to the virtual meeting. And then we have in-person meetings. Mid-year is January, February, typically. And then there's the May meeting, which is always in DC. And they get, free registration there, and they get, their support for travel to come to the meeting. So that way they're able to, kind of get involved with the section. We give them mentors. I mean, so there's, a career development from our aspect, but we're also looking, in essence, for the organization to be, trying to do the same kinds of things with the fellow that they're taking on, helping to, develop them as lawyers, because these are recent grads, so they're going to need, the mentoring of, learning, how to be a new lawyer. So we're looking for that from.
And just to pick up, Tony, on what you were saying about the ABA and the meetings and so forth, one of the things that we do try to do is involve them, not instantly, but within their 2-year period in committee programming. So you might see fellows serving as moderators for a panel, or even substantive participants in a panel. For instance, the fellow at my organization, Center for Taxpayer Rights, has had substantive roles in ABA programming, which, when you think about it, for somebody who's 2 years out of law school, could be pretty daunting, but also pretty exciting, and a great way to meet, other mentors, sort of to get the different kind of flavors of tax and figure out where that person's niche will be in the world of tax.
Yeah, and I think Meg already popped into the chat the link to the page where you can find the application for the fellowship. So just give you a sense of, the fellows have to fill out an application. There's a series of essays that they write, not very long essays, but essays for the selection committee to consider. They also need to have, reference letters, and also, letter of support from the host organization. So that would be you, because we're looking to see that, there is this connection between the two. And usually, successful applications are ones where, you really have a lot of kind of talking going on between the host organization and the candidate about, working together, making sure that it's going to be a good working relationship. What is the working relationship going to look like? What kind of project is the candidate interested in doing? And what kind of project does the organization need to have done for the people who live in the area that they cover, or the kind of work that they do? And the basic timeline is that the application is due early November 9th. Unless I'm wrong, Meg, you can correct me, but I believe it's November 9th. Then, once we have all the applications in, late November, early December, the selection committee meets, selects the finalists. And then we have interviews with the finalists and also with the host organizations. We always meet with the host organizations to, kind of talk about, what their relationship is going to be like, to try to get a sense of how fleshed out is this relationship already? Is this going to be successful? Because that's, a lot of what we're worried about, is making sure that, if we fund a fellowship and we place someone somewhere, ultimately want to get help to the, community, to the taxpayers that are being helped here. But we also want to make sure that this is going to be a successful endeavor for the candidate and for the host organization too. So that's basically what we're looking for. And,
and also to make sure that the fellow is supported in terms of access to libraries, in terms of access to the supervising attorney, and so that this is a growing opportunity for the fellow. We've most of our fellows have been success stories, and we're really proud of that. And what's made for a successful relationship is just that, a positive relationship between the supervising attorney and the fellow, access to the resources that the fellow needs, participation in the structure of the LITC or the sponsoring organization, depending on the format, and just this sort of feeling of that the fellow is being nurtured through this first really full-time employment opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And unless you had something else for the overview, Susan, we can turn it over, I think, to Meg to talk about some of the logistics.
No, I think that let's turn it over to Meg. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm playing with these spotlights. Okay. So I will just speak briefly. First, one thing that I don't think we completely hit on was that some of you may have people in mind that you want to work with. Maybe it was an intern during the summer or during the school year. Maybe it was someone that was referred to you from an academic LITC as a very motivated student you think who's interested in tax. These are really good places, probably the best places to find an applicant to partner with you. But just to clarify one more time, the expectation is that you would partner with this person before the application. So some of you might be thinking, well, where do I find this person? And, I would start with with your local LATC, hopefully academic LATC, or tax professors at nearby institutions that you maybe already have relationships with. If you're struggling to find an applicant and you think you have a good project and you could be really a great landing spot for a new lawyer, but you're really struggling to find a great person who would be a good fit, feel free to reach out to me. We've done some sort of like matchmaking in the past couple of years. It's been fairly successful, depending on the year. I can't promise that we'll find someone for you, but we can definitely try to reach out to some of our connections, put something out on the listserv saying that, you know, you really want a fellow and you're looking for one to try to reach more tax professors. It might be that there are students who live in other places, who go to other institutions now, but where you live is home for them, or where you live is where they want to live next, and they just don't know how to find you. So we can help try to find you someone if you can't find someone for yourself. Again, try. And then I just briefly on the logistics for the host organization. So Ty Hansen, who's out sick today, but would normally give this spiel, handles the finance side. If you are successful in the fellowship, in achieving the fellowship, he would walk you through sort of all the logistics. But essentially, this works best when the organization has a functioning HR and finance department. He will connect with the HR and financing department and talk about transferring the funds. But essentially, we are the sort of financial conduit the ABA tax section is once the fellowship's been established. And the fellow becomes essentially an employee of the host organization. They would then be subject to all of the HR rules and all of the benefits that any of the other employees at the host organization also experience. Sometimes that can mean that their salary differs from the salary of like an entry-level attorney, and usually host organizations are okay explaining that to current staff or anyone who has questions by saying that this is a special fellowship. It's funded differently, even though they're treated the same as fellow employees. So that applies to vacation time and all of that. It also applies to benefits. So the fellowship covers benefits in addition to the stipend that we pay. The exact stipend for next year, for the start date, which would be right around this time next year, will be determined by the clerkship salary chart, and all of that is explained in the application. But the benefits are sort of fluid based on how much it costs the host organization to pay for the benefits. So basically, the host organizations fill out a worksheet and they tell us how much money they need for benefits. And then we also cover interest on law student loans that the applicant may incur. So that can differ by person. And the applicant would submit that information to the ABA, and then we pay the host organization, and the host organization passes that money through to the fellow. So those are the main things that the fellowship covers: the stipend, the benefits, the interest on the law student loans, and then as Tony mentioned earlier, all of the travel and lodging and registration benefits for our three for the tax section's three main meetings. So that's an added benefit of the fellowship. So we are running low on time. Hopefully folks can stay a little bit. But I want to make sure we leave time for Nancy to talk a little bit about the experience of hosting a fellow, and then we can take some questions at the end. But I'll also drop my email in the chat. Again, it's also somewhere on the application. And I'm the best person to contact if you want to think through, hey, I had this idea, or my fellow thinks they might want to do this project. Do you think it's a good idea, or is this crazy? Or I'm having trouble finding a fellow, or any of those kinds of questions, or, you know, can you tell me more about how the money works? Anything like that. I can either get the answer or find you the answer. So, and I'm happy to be a thought partner as you're pulling this together. Okay, Nancy. There you are.
All right. Hi, everyone. For those of you who may have signed in a little late, my name is Nancy Rosner. I'm an attorney with the Community Tax Law Project in Richmond, Virginia. I'm also the chair of the ABA Pro Bono and Tax Clinics Committee. Excuse me. I'm here today, though, because we were lucky enough to finally get a Christine Brunswick Fellow. Our clinic's been around for 30 years, and we hadn't had one before, so that's where the thus finally comes in. And I'll share a little bit about our experience, but I don't think the way that we did it is necessarily the way that everyone has to do it. But we were lucky enough to have an intern that we worked with, had a great working relationship with. She actually interned with us a couple of different semesters. She was from a local law school. And so we pitched the idea to her. We wanted to continue working with her. She was interested in doing public service work. So we came up with a project that, was something sort of close to our hearts in terms of the work that we did. So her project was the fight against financial abuse. And I heard someone here mention working with DV organizations. So that's sort of what we did, or what Terry did. She worked with DV organizations in the state to raise awareness about basically like tax related financial abuse, or that taxes can be used as a tool of financial abuse. And so she was here for 2 years working on that project. And then she also assisted with just the general, casework as well. So I think what made our fellowship successful is we had a really good plan to begin with. We really thought it through, and we thought it through ahead of time so we could really propose it to the ABA and say, like, these are our goals, at the 6-month mark, this is what we're hoping for. At the 1-year mark, this is what we're hoping for, and have a plan. And then I think one of the other things the ABA really looks for is making sure that there is a supervising attorney that the fellow can go to. I think that's been pretty huge in terms of reviewing the application. So making sure that there is someone that can provide guidance and they're not just hiring a fellow that's sort of going to be trying to figure things out on their own, because the goal is not just the tax representation and the fellowship, but also sort of, I think someone mentioned earlier, fostering this new lawyer and helping them sort of come into their own those first couple of years when they're out of law school. So I was Terry's direct supervisor. We also had another attorney on staff that worked closely with her, but we would meet pretty regularly about her casework, about our goals, which included things like education and outreach. So, we had sort of like a target number of organizations we wanted to reach out to, a target number of, educational or outreach presentations. And so then we also had these statistics that we could later look back on and say, look, this is what she was able to accomplish. She helped, these many specific cases on these DV financial abuse issues. We reached out to this many organizations and we had this many education and outreach events. And so I think that also helped too, just having this sort of set plan and a path. And then something where we could look back and sort of reflect on what she was able to accomplish through her fellowship. So kind of tracking her progress in that way. So it was a great experience for us, as all other LITCs experience. Funding can be an issue, and we're a standalone nonprofit organization. And so we really rely pretty heavily on grants and donations, and so it was huge for us to have the ABA step up and say, we're going to pay for this fellow to help you at your clinic. Our caseload was able to go higher. We were able to reach more people. And it was all in all a really good situation. And then I also wanted to mention, because I don't think it was mentioned before, that you can use the funds for the fellowship as matching funds for your LITC grant. So I think that's also huge, because obviously we're always looking for matching funds too. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's just sort of maybe a brief overview of our experience here with our recent Brunswick fellow.
That was a great point about the matching funds, Nancy. Thanks for making that. I forgot to mention it earlier. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to just go off mute and ask them. You don't have to raise your hand.
Do you have an idea as to how much the salary is for the fellow? I know it talks about being comparable to like a federal clerkship, but do you have any idea of what the actual number is?
Yeah, so hold on, let me look at what we put. I looked it up when we did the application for this year, what it is right now, but it'll be a little bit more next year because it increases. So it's going to be about 60,000, but that's, not including benefits. That's just for the stipends. That doesn't include benefits and the student interest, the loan, the interest on the student loan.
Right. We've had a couple of people we've been talking to, interviewing who have asked, what the actual amount was going to be, other than the benefits, obviously, but the actual salary amount. So thanks.
Yeah, it doesn't change too much year on year, so it'll be in that range.
It's competitive with other public interest salaries, but it's not really competitive with law firm salaries.
Not really.
No, not really.
It's certainly a different path, that's for sure.
Having been in public service most of my career, I understand that.
But even people who have left the fellowship to do, to move into firms, nevertheless sort of take this with them and continue to do pro bono work. So that's sort of, even though they've taken that path instead of remained in public service, they've still taken parts of the fellowship with them. And I feel like the fellowship sort of continues on in that way. And maybe they touch someone who's interested in applying for a different kind of fellowship to, pursue public interest work mid-career.
And one thing I'll say that I've had this question, actually, I'll just preempt the question. There is no prohibition against side hustles, having a weekend job or whatever. This is a full-time job. The full-time fellowship, the person is expected to keep hours that would be required of any attorney at the host organization. That said, any other attorney at the host organization would probably also be allowed to have an evening or weekend job if they want. There's no prohibition against that, as long as they're fulfilling their full-time obligations. There's also no prohibition, and Susan and Tony can jump in if you disagree, but there is no explicit prohibition against an organization supplementing the fellowship salary. We have actually had that happen, and California has really strict laws around minimum wage and equity and things like that. And so if there was an organization that wanted to be more attractive to potential candidates and they wanted to supplement to raise it up to sort of what the other attorneys were making, there is no prohibition against that either. And I've answered that question a few times already for this year.
Yeah, I would supplement your answer about the side hustle and just say it depends on the rules of the organization. So the fellow is treated as though an employee. So for instance, in the organization for which I used to work, there was a rule against outside practice of law. So
Good point. That's a really good point.
If somebody chooses to supplement their salary with another job, that would have to get the approval of the sponsoring organization. So if you were to hire somebody and say, you're my new employee, but the only difference here would be they're being funded by the fellowship. It's the source of funding, but the rules of employment are the same. Right.
And a lot of places do. That's a really good point, Susan. A lot of places, that's not sort of the type of extra employment I was imagining. You're right. Generally, a legal practice outside of while you're working at a legal organization is, I would say, frequently, if not always, prohibited. So that makes sense. But I don't know. Maybe you, babysitter, wash cars, make websites. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. This may be a little fairly obvious, but I've not seen the answer looking over the application. It says the individuals to qualify are a graduate of a JD or an LLM program. Is there any stipulation for the bar status having applied a CLI status? Would we have like a certified legal intern or any type of pre-admittance to a bar association or anything like that?
Good question. That's a great question. So most of our applicants are 3Ls at the beginning of their 3L year. So not all, but many/most of our applicants. So we do not expect that anyone would have bar admission. Frequently when we make the offer is contingent on plans to take the bar. We would assume that it is required that anyone who is practicing law through the fellowship that they would take a bar exam, and whatever the relevant bar exam is. And then, we have had questions about what happens at if the person is offered the job and they're planned to start and then they don't pass the July bar, and we have had that happen, and that person would be expected to take the February bar, and if that doesn't work, then sort of we have conversations from there, and a lot of it depends on what the policies are around that set of facts are for the host organization. And so when that has happened in the past, we've followed the rules of the host organization with respect to taking time off to study for the bar, and with respect to what happens if they don't pass. But in terms of being barred, no, we do not expect applicants to be barred. And this also raises another question that we get frequently, so I'll throw that answer out there. What does recent law school or LLM graduate mean? And we intentionally left that vague, so fun for everyone. We don't have a set number of years that constitutes recent. The committee sort of takes that into account when they are assessing the situation, but frequently 5 years is fine. Sometimes 5 years compared to other applicants that are very recent. Graduates, it may be a factor in the decision. 10 years is probably too many, but who knows? Like, maybe they took some time off to do something else and didn't practice law right afterwards, and there's considerations. I would say if you think it's a borderline case, to either ask me and we can talk about it, or put it in the application. This person or that the applicant would say, I graduated from law school 10 years ago. However, I did these other things, and I've only actually practiced for 3 years, and they should just explain that. And that would go for any specific situation you want the committee to be aware of. Put it in the application, wherever you can find. That seems like the right place in the essays usually. Just explain, I know this might stand out to you from my application, but I wanted to explain to the committee X, Y, Z, whatever.
This is Jennifer. I think that I saw in the application that the fellowship would start in September. And if candidates have already graduated and passed the bar and they're applying in November, we've had pushback on this. Like, why would they have to wait? And I can't, give up other opportunities. So in the past, I remember saying that you could start in the spring.
For this fellowship, we generally start the classes together. So it doesn't have to be September 1st. It could be like September 15th or August 20th. There's some wiggle room there. But we generally have the classes. So usually when there's funding, we usually have 2 fellows per class, and they usually start at the same time, on as the prior class, and everyone sort of starts and ends on the same time. And it sort of mirrors the school year calendar, because most of the applicants, like I said, are 3Ls looking ahead. For those who have graduated, taken the bar, and are, applying in November, they would have to probably find short-term employment or something else to do between now and then. A lot of this is funding dependent. So our endowment fund that covers this can't handle adding another fellow off cycle. We wouldn't have the funds to do that. Yeah. We need someone to graduate before we can start paying someone else. But it is different than fellowship. Yeah, it is different than traditional employment. And the reason we do the selection so early really is because of 3Ls who are, we're competing against other fellowship programs. We're competing against other types of jobs that are recruiting 3Ls, and many 3Ls like to know what they're doing somewhere in the winter time period before they graduate, so that they can be assured that they have employment after graduation. I know that was the top issue on my mind when I was a 3L.
I was going to say, the one thing I think I forgot to mention in terms of the timeline was typically we extend offers December, January. So the process doesn't drag on forever. They would know December, January that they were going to be starting the following September.
Right. And like, for example, one of our fellows who just started this year was doing she had a 1-year clerkship, so it worked out well for her, where she had graduated and passed the bar, but she was employed for that whole time, and she was looking for her next steps.
Yeah, so her clerkship ended and then her fellowship started.
Yeah, so yeah, a lot of clerkships use that same calendar.
Yeah,
as
they
well.
use the same time frame usually.
These are great questions. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, if you have applicants that are interested, please tell them that we're doing a similar info session, but geared slightly differently towards applicants, law students or recent graduates who are interested. Some of them may not have a dance partner, and we will take note of those folks and maybe can connect them with some of you if you're looking. But if you do have someone that you're already sort of connected with, please encourage them to attend the info session that we're doing on Friday afternoon. And the information is also on the website on the page that I linked to earlier. There's the link to register for that as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We will share this information.
Thanks,
Thank
Tony.
you so
Thank you.
much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.